Kelly Taylor Ryan, and this is Mainly Unspoken. Today our guest is Mark Finks, and he's going to continue to talk about the Constitution, and today's topic is administering policy.
The idea that the founders had was very good. They wanted to be sure that the three basic functions of government always stayed in separate hands. So you had a function of initiating policy, the legislative function. You had a function of administering policy, the executive function, and then you had a function of judging policy, judging compliance, which would be the judiciary. Had three branches of government, and they were supposed to have separated and balanced powers with checks and balances between and among them. And then, of course, in addition to that, there are the individual rights that citizens have, so they have the sovereign power and are equal in power to the branches of government. It's just that they serve a somewhat different function. They show up, are supposed to show up and vote for people at election time, and they're supposed to communicate with their representatives in between elections.
So in order to make government work, their civic duty is to be active in government.
Actively interested and actively involved makes things
Watching
a lot better. Ever vigilant instead of simply turning their back on the process and ignoring it. So what we're trying to focus...
That's when it goes off kilter.
Seriously south, yes.
Okay.
When you don't pay attention to your government, it still pays attention to you. It faithfully sends you your tax bill and does all these other things. You might as well pay attention to it. That's my little joke. It's important to know at a given time how the ball game is faring, because at a given time there are a whole bunch of ambitious special interests who want something from the government, meaning you and me. They want to have a policy, and they want us to pay for it, and so forth. So
they want to use our resources.
Exactly. They're actively trying to get something for themselves. The founders didn't want things to be this way, but they knew that human nature worked in such a way that it would be this way. So that's why the powers are balanced and separated, and you have to have separate people performing each of the basic functions. So once a policy has been initiated by the legislative body, by the legislature or the Congress, it is sent over to the executive or administrative side of the government for the governor's or the president's signature. And this process is one of the crucial checks and balances of our representative form of government. It gives the governor or the president the opportunity to sign the bill saying, well, okay, I agree to try to carry this out.
Oh, to try to carry it.
Exactly, to attempt to administer it. It doesn't guarantee that it's going to be successful depending on all the partisanship and disagreements involved there, but we're dealing with real human beings here in the real world.
But if it becomes law, it has to be carried out.
That's right, and he's saying if he signs it, I'll make a good faith effort to do this. But he also has another alternative under our Constitution, which is just to veto it and write a veto message. You know, I don't like this policy yet, and this is why I don't like it, and I'll send it back to you and see if I can get you to insist that I try to carry this out.
You know, I'm going to stop you. Don't lose your chain of thought right there. But I always thought there was a difference between law and policy, but you're using them interchangeably. Policy is law and law is policy.
Yeah, because it isn't really policy unless it's official. If you're talking about government, you can have a lot of things that you're considering doing or considering changing or improving, but until a decision is made to actually do that, it's not law. And therefore, it's not really policy. It's a proposal. It's a potential, but not an actual. And that's very important for people to remember. There are a lot of ideas out there about what we ought to do as a society that are very bad ideas. And there are some good ones, but many of both are not official.
But if you go to some sort of administrative agency, they'll often say, well, that's not our policy.
Right.
But that doesn't mean law. That just means how they run it.
Well, actually, what it probably means is that they have some law in what they're doing, and the rest, the balance, endless pages of it are regulations. And that's a subject
Regulation isn't law.
Well, regulations have the force of law in our system. We somewhat regret that that is so. Maybe I should work that into the program that we're doing right now. The function of the elected representative of the people, the governor or the president, is to carry out the laws that have been initiated by the legislative side of the government and to give a good faith effort to that. And if he has reservations about it, the veto message can state those. You know, you need to try to get 2/3 majority in both houses to override my veto. If you really want me to try this, I don't think it's going to work. It doesn't have enough money, or it doesn't have enough this, enough that. But if you want to insist, I'll give it a try. And then the egg will be on your face if it doesn't work. You know, if you override my veto and insist, you know, do this and do it with, do this policy and do it with the money we gave you and so forth, that type of thing. That's a very important check and balance, because without that, the tendency of human nature to be dictatorial and tyrannical really comes to the fore. You eliminate that check and balance, and also the one in which the governor or president gets to appoint heads of his departments subject to the approval of the legislative body's review of those appointments. So you're saying, I'd like this fellow to head up my Department of Education or something, and you send the appointment over for review. The committee looks at the fellow, maybe holds a confirmation hearing and says, yes, we agree this person's qualified to do the things that we think should be law, or maybe they disagree. And if they don't approve the department head, the governor's got to appoint somebody else. So this is a detailed working of people's potential, their potential capabilities as department heads, and the policy's potential to be good or bad policy. That's pretty good. You wouldn't want to give that up if you could avoid it. You know, you want to keep that. That's a good feature of government that only the United States. Well, we've circumvented it. What's happened now, and especially since the days of the Franklin Roosevelt administration back in the 1930s, things seemed especially bad in the Depression, and the Congress was kind of at a loss what to do. And there were a bunch of socialistic proposals that Franklin Roosevelt wanted to see enacted. And a lot of these proposals were written in such a way that they said, there's going to be a program. It'll have this name. Broadly, it will do this function, but all of the details will be written over on the executive side of government.
It'll be written, but they can't do that. That's making the executive make law.
That's basically it, and it's a very bad idea. It was then, and it is now.
So that was against the Constitutional. I mean, clearly the Constitution.
Yes, and there were some real battles over that, and to this day, they aren't satisfactorily resolved. It's still an open question whether we should be doing this. The indication seems to be that when you have the potential to write regulation with the force of law, the Congress or the state legislature has a tendency to pass non-laws. They have relatively little substance in many cases and detail, and they've left all of that to the administrators, the department bureaucrats on the executive side of government to write.
So when you say non-law, I'm just giving permission for the Department of Motor Vehicles now to write law. I'm giving permission now to the Department of Education to write law.
Yeah, you're instructing them to write regulation. And in the United States, the Administrative Procedures Act, so-called, was passed in the 1940s because people on the conservative side, interestingly enough, were very frustrated with the tendency of bureaucracies to write regulations during the 30s. They said, all right, we're going to have an Administrative Procedures Act. We're going to require you to publish these in the Federal Register and have a period for comment and review before they can take effect and all this, thinking this would curb the process.
But comment and review from who?
Anybody, the public and all the
But the public doesn't even know about that.
Well, they're posted. What can I tell you?
They're posted, but they don't know. Well, you taught about it in school. First time I heard about it was a few years ago, and I've been out of school for a long time.
That's right. I first learned about it in school because I was involved in high school forensics.
Okay, but you were unusual.
An unusual student, that's right. But
stop anybody on the school in the sidewalk and ask them if they know what the Federal Register is. They'll
yes,
say, what?
Or the Administrative Procedures Act. They wouldn't have any idea.
But that's a legal notice to the general public that
Right.
this law is coming on the books, and if you
Regulations, yes.
this regulation's coming on, if you have a complaint, you better speak up now.
Right.
That's putting them on notice. They don't
That's-
even know they're on notice.
That's true. And the same thing happens in Maine, where ads are taken in newspapers published in the state for state regulations. Maine's Administrative Procedures Act is much more recent. It was passed in 1976, 7, or 8. I forget which year, but it was one of those three, somewhere in the mid to late 1970s. And interestingly enough, before that was passed, in the state of Maine, some of the departments would have some sort of a dream list or wish list, some policy they wanted, and they had to bring those policies before the legislature in the form of legislative documents that were proposed laws. And time and time again, they would get shot down by the legislature because the legislature would say, oh, this is empire building, or, you know, you're just trying to gain greater power and control and so forth. They wouldn't agree with it. After the Maine Administrative Procedures Act was passed, it was just amazing how much of this stuff began to crop up in regulations. They would get something to hang it on, some sort of mandate from the legislature, and then they would stick in the regulatory material that pertained to that subject when they wrote the regulations for the law. So in 1976, 7, or 8, you had 0 state regulations under this law, this Maine Administrative Procedures Act. It's only been 26 years that we've had the Maine Administrative Procedures Act, and if you now look at the Maine Code of Regulations that has resulted in the 26 years, it takes up more shelf feet by far than the Maine statutes. The laws from 1820 to 1976 take up fewer shelf feet than the regulation volumes from 1976 to 2002. More regulations have been written by the executive side of Maine state government in terms of sheer volume, pages, and shelf feet than the laws of the state of Maine.
And yet they are laws.
Well, they're said to have the force of law.
So that's the same thing, basically. I mean,
So you've more than doubled the volume of verbiage in just 26 years. That's not a good sign.
And you've done it unconstitutionally, because it's not coming from the body that was supposed to make the laws.
Supposed to initiate policy to begin with. It makes very lazy legislators. They begin letting the technocrats in the administrative side of the executive side of government write their own ticket, and they're following the.
So there's no checks and balances.
They've wiped out a lot of the effectiveness of the checks and balances. That's right. And in recent years, there have been a number of
And
situations.
we're all being strangulated by it.
Well, the citizen gets the full benefit and effect, shall we say. Whatever good and bad things happen as a result of it, the citizen catches it in the end. So, therefore, people need to consider well how policy should be administered. In our heart of hearts, we'd like to feel that we have a good, vigorous election. We select a governor who really has the charisma and sheer ability, and maybe to some degree the political philosophy that we think would be best for the state. We've gotten very factional and partisan in our thoughts about this, so now you have this shotgunning out of all these splinter candidates in the current race for governor. You got tons of people running as
7, I think.
independents and Greens and all sorts of stuff, because we've lost our ability to get together as a society and agree on what truth is or ought to be. So we've got all these splinter
Now, is that bad that we have 7 candidates, or is that going to start opening people's eyes? Is that why are there 7 candidates? I think.
Well, it's the dangers of factionalism. The more we've become such a me generation, everyone's so selfish and self-centered that the fact that you have 7 candidates doesn't even mean anything to them.
But I don't know, because maybe because if you elect a Republican or if you elect a Democrat, you're both electing basically the same policy making.
Well,
I mean, what's the difference really between a Democrat and a Republican?
The Democrats are the fast socialists and the Republicans are the slower socialists.
Okay, so it's just a matter of degree.
Yeah.
So now we have, Agnes King was the first independent, so people are saying, oh, we're rejecting being controlled by only two parties. So is this more, instead of, you know, splintering people, but instead of, you know, rebelling against being controlled so much? Okay, we want people that are not going to be beholden to two parties.
Well, people have kind of lost their confidence. The political parties seem to stand for nothing in particular.
That's right, they don't.
And,
well, not only do they stand for nothing, but they control us. And they control who runs. I mean, Badachi thinks he's in.
In the sense that they're gatekeepers, that's correct.
They are gatekeepers. And should we have gatekeepers in a free society? How can the people be sovereign, and how can they elect the people to truly represent them if there's gatekeepers?
Well, those are all really great questions. I guess I would say to the viewer that he needs to think of this whole process in terms of whether or not he's involved with it. If you don't have a vigorous process generating the candidates or developing ideas and discipline in the political parties and all the rest of it, you have a very devitalized system. It's going to produce very bad results. And most people watching this may be a little touched in their conscience by what we're saying. We hope that they are. You get pretty much the government that you deserve, and if you've completely neglected to pay attention and participate, it drifts its own way. It winds up being the kind of wimpy, appeasing sort of thing that government has become. They just want to know what a given person's special interest is, and you know, how can I appease you? And the next group or person comes up and, okay, what are you interested in? What do you want?
But I don't think everybody is that's running like Philip Morris Napier. I don't think he's going to appease anybody.
Well,
he seems to be out there for the people, as John Jenkins. I don't know. It seems they're very different from these other slick politicians that come on.
A populist always has that kind of appeal. He says, I'm for the people. And you say, well, okay, then what do the people want? And they'll rattle you off a list of stuff. If you follow...
Well, I asked David Flanagan what the people want.
Yeah.
And he said that they want security, they want opportunity.
Yeah, well, that's a political answer. George Washington and Abraham Lincoln, some of the great figures of United States history, had a very deep sense of what America was about. And they knew that it was a very rare thing in history to have any degree of respect for individuals and inherent rights that individuals had. This is completely unprecedented in world history. We're the first nation to declare such a thing and make it stick. And Washington, Lincoln, and the other great luminaries that was their first and foremost consideration, that we had this wonderful form of government with a constitution to constitute or establish what the Declaration had declared, and that was worth protecting. And when you have that kind of lofty perspective, then all this other stuff is petty haggling. But today's politician majors in the minors. He's interested in what every special interest wants, and he gets up and he utters as many special interest things as he possibly can because he thinks he's appealing to the broadest number of people. Now, in reality, the voter and citizen should think in completely the opposite way and focus on that individual at the race for governor. We're talking about administering policy today, and you know, how fit or qualified is this guy to run the state? Is he really capable of carrying out, does he have the leadership to carry out what the legislature is making for laws? Can he handle this, and what sort of person is he going to be in this role? That's the real question. And the fact that he has his own political ideology or philosophy is a little bit incidental to that. You want to be careful what he believes, because that's certainly going to affect what he does in office.
But how do you find out? I mean, they come on here and you know, they have their, when you say, well, that was a political answer, you know, how do you see through that? I mean, sound bites on television are what, 6 seconds if you're lucky? I mean, how do you really get to know these people?
Even a child is known by his doings, you know. The best way to know these guys is to have known them in their in their youth and in the locale from which they came when they served on school boards and councils and first served in the legislature and things of that nature. It's a relationship that's built over a considerable period of time.
Well, Greenspan once thought that, you know, if we lost the gold standard, the economy would come tumbling down.
Sure, he used to be a hard money advocate.
Okay, so where is he now? That's the opposite side of the playing
field. He's become a slavish servant of the Eastern establishment as a presidential appointee on the Federal Reserve Board. He's the chairman of the Federal Reserve Board.
So he changed his colors quite rapidly over the last 30 years.
Yeah, you'd say so, and he would be an example of somebody who is relatively far removed from elective office and electoral politics. He's back in that foggy bunch of technocrats, rather, who perform all these technical functions that are barely understood by anybody. You know, that's kind of Greenspan's job. But it's an example of an area in which the Congress made a delegation of power to what is really a de facto bank monopoly and a private board, and really did a lot of damage to the administration of policy in this country, because technically the coining of money is the Congress's authority.
Domain, absolutely.
And the administration Department of the Treasury is supposed to be taking care of that. Instead, we have so-called Federal Reserve notes circulating as currency, and a thoughtful, cautious person would wonder about all of this, of what it meant and what it has done to us. And that's beyond the scope of our present discussion, but it's a good example of something where a very crucial piece of policy, the integrity of our money, our monetary system, is actually not controlled by the elected executive of our nation the way the founders wanted it to be.
So could you very briefly say about Chinchetta, or is this just asking too much of you, Chinchetta or Baldacci or Flanagan or Philip Morris? Who would be the best administrator for this state?
It would be really hard to pick one of the current candidates out as a great example of an administrator. I don't think any of them have held an executive office of note. They've all either been legislators or in some cases not elected at all. So it's kind of an educated guess who might do the best at administration.
Flanagan was an administrator, though he was head of CMP. And
well, that's in a stock, you know, in a stock finance company. He was not quite the same thing, even though it's a regulated public utility. But it's not the same thing as being the head of government. It's or the executive branch of a government.
So are you saying that you need to elect someone that has administrative political experience?
Well, the old idea, which the founders promoted, and I heartily agree with, is a concept of statesmanship, that there is actually an aptitude for government that only a few people share. Out of 100% of the population, maybe 1 in 100, 2 in 100, something like that, have a special talent for government. And you want to search these people out the same way you try to find a good dentist or a good plumber or a good psychiatrist. That's a rare talent. And you want to find those people, and then you want to elect them to office because they have special skills in this area, can do the best job for the people of the country. It's not an elitist concept. It's more just a very practical or a scientific approach to government, recognizing the talents that people have.
But not only do they have to have the skills, but they have to have the moral values, and they have to have some sort of political understanding of the Constitution and be willing to uphold it. You can be a great administrator and administrate all our money outside of our pockets.
Sure. Well, the founders, that's the concept of statesmanship that the founders favored. They knew that politics was a practical art, but that the high-minded and capable, and there were many among them who were the best people to put forward. And they had the advantage of knowing at the beginning, at least, that their people had been tested severely by the circumstances of the War for Independence, and in Lincoln's case, the War of the Secession and so forth. There are a lot of very, very difficult things. You wouldn't really want to be in there particularly unless you felt a calling to do it, even though there were...
Because it's a hard place to be.
A hard place to be. There certainly was no lack of rascally scoundrels, you know, participating in politics at any point in the country's history. There were always people who were trying to advance themselves, but the confidence the founders had was that if the people kept their head up, stayed alert, and kind of watched who they were dealing with, that they would still have the best shot at picking somebody who would do the best job. Abraham Lincoln was a wonderful example of a leader who was popular because of that gut sense that people had that he was honest Abe and that they could trust him and so forth. They, through all these different situations in his life, as a storekeeper for a while and as a lawyer and various other things that he did, they had learned what sort of integrity he had. They really liked him and trusted him. That proved to be a very fortunate thing for the Union, because that's one of the things that kept the country together.
So do you believe that people can waste their vote? I mean, if they vote for Carolyn Shute as a write-in governor to protest against there's no great administrators out there, is that a wasted vote?
Well, it's very hard if you're trying to use the ballot to send an obscure message. You know, if you only have a little smattering of people who vote that particular way across the state, the message is that you're fairly weak. You know, you may have tried to start a popular movement here, but you got a few votes, not a lot of votes. If, on the other hand, you got many thousands of write-in votes across the state, that sends a little different message, and that would tend to make the rest of the political apparatus sit up and take notice. And to some degree in Maine, that's true. I think Pat LaMarche got over the 5% threshold in one of the races for governor, and that got an independent status on the ballot for the Greens. I think they call it the Independent Green Party. There's some sort of a accommodation there to do that. But that's how they got their ballot status, was through having a little, you know, 5 out of 100 voters vote for that candidate. That was not a write-in. She was actually on the ballot and got that.
So vote your conscience, because then there is no such thing as a wasted vote. Because if you're voting your conscience and you want to make a change, and hopefully there will be more people like you thinking like you, so maybe there's not such a thing as a wasted vote. We only have about 30 seconds left, so.
Well, speaking and participating. If you want to have people carry out policies faithfully, then you want to know that they're faithful. And to find that out, you got to know who you're voting for.
Takes a lot of listening.
Yes, it does.
And research.
Yes, both, yeah.
All right, well, Mark, as usual, it's been a pleasure. I hope you come back soon.
Be glad to.
Bye.
We'll see you again.
All right, we have a lot of people running for governor. We need someone who's honest and who's going to be a good administrator, so you have a lot of researching to do, ask a lot of questions, and thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.